get rid of the note now. So good morning, everybody. We'll do that again. I am Phil Brilliant. I'm from Continuing Professional Education Services, as well as Brilliant Environmental Services. Not quite sure which I spend more time on, but do my best to do both. And we are here this morning. And I guess Mr. Eggington just said it. We kind of do our annual Tony Russo spotlight on the forecast of environmental legislation in New Jersey and what we think is going to happen in 2024. And I do ask if you can, one, mute yourself just so we don't have any interference. We've had a couple of blips this morning with some Wi-Fi issues, but that might be because of the weather. So bear with us if there's any issues. Hopefully everybody is safe and made it through the storm last night and this morning and is ready for the next one this weekend. And also if you have questions, comments, a couple ways to do it. One is make sure to put it in the chat. And that's why I always say, put your name and company name in the chat so we make sure everybody has access to use that. Or you can raise your hand and, you can ask the question yourself. But I do ask if everybody can mute themselves so we have no interference. And we're going to jump right in because, we have a lot to cover. It was an exciting day yesterday in Trenton as the governor gave his State of the State address. And I was telling Tony before everybody got on this morning that for some odd reason, which I very rarely do, I watched it. And so I turned it on my computer and they introduced the opening prayer from Reverend Marty Robinson, Esquire. He's my next door neighbor growing up. So in the small world of things, I got to listen to him make jokes about how Michigan is happy because they won the national championship. And then I don't think he satisfied Coughlin's request to pray and guarantee a Rutgers national championship next year. But hey, everybody's equal now. Nobody has a win, so we'll see what ends up happening. But I am very happy to have with me, my friend, colleague, member of the board of Continuing Professional Education Services, Tony Russo, who is the president of CIANJ, Commerce and Industry of New Jersey. He is the publisher and CEO of Commerce Magazine, and one hell of a nice guy. So a good guy to have around. I'm trying to. We've known each other a long time.
Yeah.
But, what I always like to say is, Tony's kind of touched everything. Not everybody, everything. He was an environmental consultant. He worked at DEP. Though I noticed that's not on your resume, Tony. On LinkedIn, you need.
Oh, I thought I still have that reference.
No, I think they kind of must have pushed that out. And graduate at GIT with a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering. So if this doesn't work out, he can work on your HVAC system or do a CAD drawing for you. But, really understands what we do in the environmental field, understands what's happening in Trenton, and really does provide a great resource to all of us and works hard for us. So, and I always like to tease him that he is a proud unaffiliated voter. So, he kind of touches all sides. And, yesterday was a big day in Trenton, so we're going to talk about it. And, Tony, I'll give you the opening salvo and you can give your opening remarks.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Phil. And good morning, everybody. Happy New Year. Hopefully everybody enjoyed the holidays. I always enjoy doing these kind of events with Phil. I also want to acknowledge his colleagues, Jules, and I'm not sure if George is on, but, it's been a pleasure to work with CPES throughout the years, Phil. So thanks for your friendship, partnership, and everything you do. And Mike, I want to acknowledge my friend and colleague, Mike Eggington, who goes back even further before me in Trenton. My line for you, Mike, is you are the mayor of the State House. And, he knows everybody in Trenton. So I'm glad that he's on. Kind of just jump in, Mike, if I missed anything. But this is always good because when I think about what we want to talk about today, Phil, is, okay, it's January. Everybody's excited. It's like the start of a new school year. You hit it on the head. This year, it's kind of unique because we're doing this the day after the governor delivered a State of the State. We're doing this the day after the new legislature got sworn in. That's unique. What does that mean to us? And I'll explain what it means. And I'll start with the legislature. We just started our 221st legislature. They start a 2-year term. That means every bill that didn't make it through has to reset that, and it goes back to square one. So you're talking about thousands of bills that now have to be reintroduced, heard in committee, and go through the process. Now, there's a bunch of bills, and again, we could talk about it, that made it through the last session, what they call lame duck. And the governor actually signed a few on Monday He still has a few on his desk that I'm not sure what he's going to do with, but so it's unique. And here's the unique thing about the new legislature. Think about, we have 120 senators and assembly people. We have 37 new faces, 37, right? That's 30%. I can't remember, Mike, maybe you do. I can't remember in my 23 years where you had this kind of incoming class, right, of new folks. I mean, this is substantial. And Mike and I were just talking about it before. You talk about people that are no longer in the legislature. You have the former Governor Cody, who has actually the record of being the longest serving legislator. And I think right now the dean of the legislature happens to be a Republican, Senator Singer, who's the longest serving. But there's a lot of talent, a lot of history that aren't going to be in Trenton. There's an opportunity for us, right, to be informed or inform the 37 new people. But I'll make it about the environment. And if you look at this, and if you look at the Senate Environment Committee, it's still going to be chaired most likely by Senator Smith, vice chaired by Senator Greenstein. But you have now Cody, who was the other Democrat gone. But also on the Republican side, going back to the elections last year, you have Senator Durr and you have, I think, Gene Stanfield from Bergen County, that they're gone. So out of a 5-member Senate Environment Committee, you're going to have 3 new people on, right? Who are these 3? I think Mike and I are kind of waited with bated breath to find out, once we hear the news. I know the Assembly came out with chair committees, which I'll talk about, but that's significant, Phil. And I want people to understand that you're going to have a new makeup of the Senate Environment Committee, because a lot of things start with Senator Smith. A lot of the ideas, the issues. I mean, when you think about the history that Senator Smith has, the other person that's gone, and I think, Mike, I don't know if you caught it, but on Monday when they acknowledged Keval Duhan leaving, right? So Keval Duhan, if you don't know him, this is somebody that was the architect behind the scenes of Site Remediation Reform Act. A lot of the environmental issues. Now he left, he retired. So I think it's going to be a challenge for a lot of us to kind of just stay focused, and whoever the new members of the committee are, to kind of educate them on our position. So it's pretty significant.
Hey, Tony, just to add on your good point with Keval on legislative staff to handle environment issues. Taya Sheridan, who handles environment issues for the Assembly Republicans, told me she's retiring February 1st. And Carrie Ann Calvohan from OLS retired, I guess, about 3 weeks ago. So these are people you and I have known for forever in Trenton that handled environmental issues. And I don't even know who the backbenchers are that'll be coming up, handling it on behalf of Smith and Chairman Kennedy. So good point about Keval. Yep.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, good point.
So that opens up a question. I mean, and this is a complete guess, is change of faces, change of ideology, change of the people, 37 new faces, good or bad when it comes to environmental legislation?
Well, I think it depends on your perspective, Phil. I always like new blood coming in, new faces, new ideas, new thoughts, but also it's an opportunity for us to kind of educate them on our position. So, it's a fresh start. It's almost like hitting the reset button, especially on this committee. Again, Senator Smith, I don't think is going to go anywhere. Senator Greenstein as well, but I think it's an opportunity for new ideas. So I always look at the positive side of things, and I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, rumor has it I always look at the negative side, so that's why I asked the question.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, but keep going. So
I'll go to the.
Go.
I'm sorry. On the Assembly side, Assemblyman Kennedy is still going to chair the now expanded Environment Committee. There was another committee that dealt with natural resources. Speaker Coughlin made a decision to kind of merge the two. What does that mean? I'm not sure, but we'll probably see more activity from the expanded Environment Committee. But you look at who's lost in that committee. I think its vice chair is Stanley Sterling. Stanley. I always get that confused, Mike. I think it's Assemblyman Stanley. And so it's interesting that John McKeon, who's a longtime member of that committee, and also chaired it at some point, former mayor of West Orange and attorney, he became senator, right? He took Cody's spot. So, there's going to be a couple of changes on the Assembly side, But the reason why I say that, and for this forum, it's important because we're going to talk about, what's going on, what happened in 2023, what we think is going to happen in 2024. It starts with the legislature. Obviously, it's going to start with the governor's office, obviously with the DEP commissioner and some changes there. So I just want people to appreciate that, this is an opportunity for all the business groups to kind of, and the stakeholders to kind of take the time and meet with them. And I'm sure Mike and I and a bunch of other groups will kind of invite the new people out to EBC, right, our Environmental Business Council meeting, and just kind of inform them of what's going on. So big news, right? So that's the legislative side of the coin. On the governor's state of the state, if you missed it, typically the state of the state is the governor's opportunity to kind of preview what his wish list is. He doesn't talk about the budget. I think the budget address is the more important one that probably comes in late February, maybe early March, where they talk about money. But his wish list, to sum it up, and it was like about an hour and a half, he talked about a lot of platitudes, a lot of things that, he wants to do. As it relates to the environment, I think the big one is, and it's a cause of consternation for a lot of our companies, is his commitment, again, with 100% renewable energy by 2035. Do the math. That's 12 years away. It's not a long time. It's not a long time at all. And I know the EV mandate for cars, the electrification of buildings, and we could talk about what's going on with charging stations, incentives. We actually have a member, and I spent a lot of time with him the past year. He actually installs EV station, the charging stations. And, when you really get into the details, there's 3 different levels. Not all of them are connected to a grid, and if you think about what these hotels and parking lots and office spaces have to go through, everybody thinks, okay, you put in a charging station, but there's landscaping that's involved, a lot of digging up, infrastructure, electrical, upgrades. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money that goes into it. But I think you're going to see, again, the governor's wish list on the energy side is, hey, let's double down. Even though Orsted left late last year, he's not giving up on wind. He's pushing solar. I know the community solar program was expanded. So you're going to start seeing possibly some legislation to kind of fill in the gaps on the energy side. And then some of the other issues that he's kind of committed to, non-environmental, affordable housing, reducing medical debt, reducing out-of-pocket expenses for abortions. An interesting one is same-day voter registration, right? So his point is, why should somebody suffer if they forget to register or forget to fill out some paperwork? So he wants to see a bill that would allow same-day voter registration. Think about that for a second, right? That means the day of or even early voting, people can go in and register and vote. Who knows what that's going to mean, right? But that's interesting. So, so
So sorry, Tony, did they pass and did he sign that basically 16-year-olds who are going to become 17?
Yeah, right. Sign that. And that bill is specific to if you are 17 before a primary, if you're going to be 18 before the general election,
right?
You'll be allowed to vote in the primary, right? So that's one thing. He also wants legislation to allow 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds to vote for school board. I guess the school board education positions. So who knows, Phil? I think you're going to start seeing some bills in that direction. But the state of the state, I tell a lot of our members, it's interesting because it gives you a perspective on what the governor's, thoughts are and views. Just to give you some context, last year it was big on the liquor license thing, and that's still going through the legislature, right? The whole battle with permits versus licenses. He wanted the boardwalk, the $100 million. That's in the budget. It's something that was accomplished. So again, this is his wish list. Whether or not Senate President Scutari or Speaker Coughlin, agree, it will probably see that in the next couple of weeks. Somebody just commented about the same-day voter registration. Yeah, chaos. That's probably a good way to look at it. But
yeah, a lot of chaos, and it's interesting too. So, what is 20% of the voters in New Jersey voted last election day, if that many? So we're going to get 22% now. I mean, yeah, is it really going to increase the number of people who vote other than presidential years or governor years? So,
I agree there. And this year, just so everybody knows, presidential, congressional. Obviously, the big one we could talk about is Senator Menendez's spot. what's going on. I think obviously what's going to happen in terms of the president's race will definitely have an impact on the 2025 gubernatorial race here in New Jersey. So a lot going on, but so that's the state of the state. I want to mention a couple of things of couple of bills that he did sign on Monday. And if I could sum up what 2023 was all about, probably best summed up in 4 letters, right? PFAS, PFAS, right? It was all about PFAS last year, probably going back 5 years now. The department's been collecting a lot of information, a lot of data. Senator Greenstein sponsored a few bills dealing with PFAS, the majority of them. Hey, we should investigate this. We should look at alternatives to water supply. There's that forever chemicals bill that was the most controversial one, kind of similar to what Maine did in terms of banning the use of PFAS. And then what we started to see is, it's everywhere, right? It's everything that you touch. There's 12,000 plus PFASs out there. So this is an issue that I think is going to be front and center this year. I don't know how it's going to play out, Phil. And I don't know if anybody on a call can answer this, but I tried to find out. A year ago around this time, we actually did a Superfund program. And I remember Walter Mugden and I talked during the break, and the big push there was whether or not they were going to include PFAS and CERCLA in Superfund cases, which would change the whole dynamic of the Superfund program. But I'm not sure if the rules have been promulgated yet, but it was a proposal. So I think a lot's going to happen. The DEP is probably going to look and work with what EPA does on PFAS, but he did sign the one bill. He did ban the use of PFAS in firefighting foam.
Yep.
He sets aside about $250,000 for the remediation or disposal of it. I think folks will have 2 years to comply, so that's now law. He did conditionally veto the microplastics bill, which I thought was interesting because if you read the conditional veto, he thinks the legislation is just a little too far ahead where he wants the DEP to be. He wants the DEP to kind of take a look at defining what microplastics are and then study it and then figure out whether or not there should be a ban. So that's actually going back to the legislature. I think one of the other ones that he signed, again, some of the bills that the PFAS one that were on it, there's a couple of ones that probably need to go back to committee, and that's looking for alternative water supplies. So I count like at least 5 or 6 bills, right? But some of the other bills, just to give you an idea, that's the committee, at least on the Senate side, there's hundreds of bills that the Senate committee can look into. Just to give you an idea, the big one for a lot of our folks, Phil, and it happened about 2 years ago, is this extended producer responsibility. So if you're a plastics manufacturer, a plastics company, I think Senator Smith held a big public hearing where basically if the bill goes through, money has to be set aside. It's almost like a paint stewardship program where, the plastic companies have to figure out how to take more plastic out or reuse plastic, recycled materials in their bags. And that's a huge deal. I mean, that's such an important bill that we're going to keep an eye on. I don't know if the senators has got any plans to move it this year, but that's something that we'll definitely keep our eye on.
And a comment did come in that basically the federal government has not yet finalized their PFAS regulations.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so that's in Superfund, right?
Yeah.
Oh, another big one, and this is an opportunity. We actually have some members, Mike, I'm sure you have too. He did sign the Electric and Hybrid Battery Management Act.
Right.
Think about that. Everything that's going on with electric cars, right? So it requires the department to work with manufacturers to figure out, how to manage these batteries, the lithium batteries. So I think that's now law. So we'll see. So there's a lot that was signed, a lot of bills that, the big one for us that's non-environmental, and I spent some time on the phone yesterday with a couple of members, is insurance. If you have commercial trucks, commercial vehicles over a certain weight, your premiums are going to go up if the governor signs this bill. I know the one concern for a lot of our companies was the spike, because most folks have about $1 million per vehicle. It's going to spike up to $1.5 million, and that creates some consternation out there. So, I don't know, maybe Mike knows, but I think he's got several bills that are important that he's got, 45 days, Mike, to sign? Am I right on that? Or
I thought he has 10 days after the legislature departs. I thought he literally has to clean it up, from the past session. I believe it's 10 days. It's 45 when
yeah,
it's
so I guess we'll
in process. Yeah.
okay.
You
So I guess we'll know
covered the
soon enough.
gamut.
Yeah.
But the other thing I'll give take a temporary credit run anyway is the CBT surcharge. The governor allowed that to sunset, so that was I say it's a
Yes.
minor victory because who knows with the next budget and the one after that what our financial situation will be. But at least for now, that did sunset. So I know you were all over that too, Tony.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Some of the other bills that I think everybody should put on their radar, again, when you think about warehousing, there's going to be probably a push to look at stormwater runoff. There's going to be a look at climate impact around these warehouses. Climate change is still kind of the nexus back with the energy master plan. That's the big unknown. I mean, I know there's several bills that probably have to go back through in terms of incentives to put in these EV stations, to go more electric. Again, a lot of our members are concerned with cost. A lot of them feel that the infrastructure isn't there, the reliability. I want to give credit to Mike because I thought the anecdote that you brought up in one of the hearings, Mike, in terms of going all electric is when you had your famous train ride to Washington where, electric went out down in DC, but Mike's train was the only one that came back because it was diesel operated. So, I thought that resonated with a lot of the legislators, Mike. So nice job there.
Thanks.
So I think, yeah, Phil, legislatively, it'll be interesting to see the new people, the bills that I just talked about. We may see some one-offs too. A lot of bills dealing with money, dealing with the Environmental Infrastructure Trust Program, the one-offs with open space, dedicating some of the CBT money. So you're going to start seeing a lot of those, for the most part, they're not controversial and they usually go through without any issues. So I'll kind of take a pause there in terms of legislatively, if anybody has any questions.
Yeah. And while, if anybody has a question, either put in the chat or raise your hand or just, we'll try to coordinate unmuting yourselves. But, let's talk about, so, there was a lot of things during this last campaign and, with the whole new legislature. I mean, is there one person in this 37 who's going to stand out, or you think is going to be somebody who's going to rock the boat to where we've normally been? Is there anybody who's an environmental, guru, someone who's going to lead the way on environmental legislation?
Hey, Tony, you know who I would say who's returning? I'm glad he's returning because I think he's good on environmental.
John Berzicelli?
There you go. Yep, you said it.
John Berzicelli.
Yep,
yeah.
without a doubt.
Yeah, so folks don't know John Berzicelli, former mayor of Paulsboro, businessman. I guess he's actually a rainmaker. I mean, movie studios actually hire him because he owns a bunch of fire trucks to create rain. But a lot of our members down there, Mike, did enjoy their relationship with Berzicelli, right? So he lost on the back, I guess it was 2021, but he's now the senator, right? He beat the truck driver, Ed Durr. Yeah. So I agree with Mike. I wonder if they'll put him on the Environment Committee. I think he'd be fantastic. He is a pro-business Democrat. He does understand our issues. But, I'm trying to think, Phil, across the 37, and I thought what was interesting, if folks remember Tip O'Neill, right? Yeah. It's all, politics is all local, and I thought it was fascinating. You hit it on the head. I did the deep dive with the voter count. You're right. Out of the 6 million voters in New Jersey, only 22% showed up. That means less than 3 out of 10. That means 7 voters stayed home. And when you go further into the dive, right, we're talking about John Berzicelli, Gloucester County, Salem County, down in South Jersey. Everything is local. I mean, Brandon Umba, who's the Republican down there in Burlington County, I mean, it was past the election, and he lost by a few hundred, right? That's a seat that the Democrats picked up. You go to Monmouth County, where Senator Gopal is very popular. He came out against the wind issue. His 2 running mates, Luann Peter Paul, and I forget the doctor's name, they won. Mike, I don't know on the assembly side if there's anybody else. The 6 seats that the Democrats picked up, and this is what I love about politics. And again, my background's more not political, but I tell people, Mike, hopefully you agree. You could read everything, you could see everything, but expect the unexpected. And I think it proved itself out again in November that everybody thought going in that maybe the Republicans were going to pick up a couple of seats in the assembly side. What happened? They lost 6. Who would have thought?
Yep.
So now, now bring that to the federal level and what's going to happen with the president, President Biden and former President Trump. I mean, buckle up. I tell our members, buckle up, because you're going to see a lot of stuff. But in my opinion, it's, expect the unexpected, because that's usually what happens in politics.
Yep.
So let's anybody have a question? Okay, let's dive into regulations. Okay. We've done a lot of work over the past few years. You talk about PFAS, and we've seen the DEP come out with emergency standards and then promulgate standards. We were talking earlier this morning that on January 2nd, when we were all waking up from New Year's, they dropped groundwater quality standards proposal. I mean, is that what we're going to see this coming year out of DEP? And, where do we stand relative to the SARA 2.0 regulation package with ARCs and tech regs, as well as, I'll throw out the other, I guess it's 1 letter and 3 numbers, A901. So I kind of threw the whole basket at you.
So where do you want me to start? I'll start with the groundwater quality standards, right? To your point, my email started blowing up, literally right after New Year's. The department published groundwater quality standards amendments. And I think one of our members did a deep dive. I want to say 6 or 7 compounds dropped by an order of magnitude. Now, the comments are due in March. I'm sure all the business groups will get together. I think the public hearing is January 30th. I'll probably say a few things on the 30th. It's a virtual hearing, which is good. And so that's out there, Phil. So I think everybody has to go through the groundwater quality standards and see where we are. I thought, and again, to the department's credit, one of the things that seems to be going in the right direction, and we started this about a year ago, is the independent professional judgment, what used to be called best professional judgment. That whole coalition, I know Mike was part of it, the BIA group. It seems like Dave and Hames, right? I wasn't at the last meeting, but it seems like they got it in the terms of the permit backlog with remedial action permits. They have to do something, and it looks like, again, giving the power back to the LSRP, let him or her kind of issue a certification to say I'm good, and try to reduce that backlog, because it is an economic issue, right? Everybody thinks it's an LSRP responsible party DEP issue, but if sites aren't being cleaned up and people are making decisions on whether to take out a loan or not, that affects our banks, that affects our accountants, our attorneys. So you go down the list. Yeah, I think it's important that.
And Tony, just to follow up on that, they kind of threw it out at the last RPII meeting to everybody's surprise. We haven't heard anything about it since that I know of. We haven't seen anything since, but there's a lot of questions out there, because a lot of LSRPs will tell you, we already have a certification that's a page long and covers everything, including our firstborn. What can this certification do, and what's going to be different than that, and how is it going to tie into our licenses? And for the PRCRs, it's what the department had originally said, is that they may not look at it immediately, but they're going to look at it when the biennial certs come around. Well, if I'm lending money, or if I'm doing a development and you're telling me that everything's taken on the LSRP signature and certification now, but 2, 3, 4 years down the road, when I get to a biennial cert, we're going to look at it. Is it a closed door, open door? There's still a lot to be learned about that process, though it showed they're listening, that they're listening to the issues that are out there, which was a change. So I'll give them that.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, definitely positive. I mean, if we could avoid a legislative fix or a more complicated regulatory fix that could take even longer, I think if they could work it out through policy, let's do that.
Yeah. And a question just came in, and I think, is there any possibility of a discussion that when remediation standards come in, they're not retroactive? And I think the answer is no, because they always New Jersey always goes by what the strictest standards are at the time you look at something. So, if you're doing biennial cert and the standards change, you're looking at the new standards. I mean, I think that's the way they've always worked. Is there any way to turn back that clock, Tony?
I don't think so. I mean, that's something that, I can't imagine, Phil, you're a practitioner, right? I mean, the whole point, if the standard drops, then they need to reassess everything that just was closed out to see if there's a public health concern.
Yeah. I mean, it's
right. So,
doing it long enough. And I mean, I can't even count the number. I made the joke before. I'm getting ready to move my office. And the first question anybody ever asked me is, what about the 30 years New Jersey registers in the conference room? Do we need to move them? And I say, yes, because I sometimes go back and I look at where the standard was and what was required in 93. So yeah, it's New Jersey.
Look, that's a tough one, right? That question. I mean, I get it. But what the solution is, maybe develop a process that's efficient, that gives you, I've been hearing this word predictability for how many years now? And that's all that people want on the regulated side, is they want predictability, right? Okay, just tell me what I need to do. I want to make a business decision. I was at a meeting recently where I was with one of our college presidents, and he was asking about, the speed of business. And, and this is something for, the legislature, the governor, regulatory folks, is that the speed of business, right, Mike, happens quickly. I mean, when I talk to a lot of our business owners, the speed at what they make decisions on is incredible, Phil. And a lot of times they don't understand that the regulatory process, the permanent process, especially if you're in a development community, it could take 2 years. It could take 2 years, and 2 years is an eternity, because a lot of things could change. But what business really wants is that predictability. So look, I'm happy that the independent professional judgment thing is going in the right direction, because it started to slow down the permit backlog. And then I could talk about, our favorite topic. I'm very close to this one, is the A901, right? I mean, the good news is Governor Murphy, about a year and a half ago, signed a law extending the compliance date, just to kind of refresh everybody's memory here. The A901, which is really the assembly bill that happened in the 1980s, sponsored by, I guess it was Senator Lesniak back then, really requires an A901 license if you move solid waste. It's really more if they want to filter out organized crime. Very complicated process. The Attorney General's office is involved. State police is involved. The application goes back 5 years, 10 years. Did you ever have any violations? Who are your business partners? Who are your business partners? I mean, they do a thorough investigation to make sure you don't have any criminal record.
They interview your ex-wife. They interview all your.
Oh, absolutely.
It's very thorough.
It's not an easy license to get. I could tell you that the members that have gotten it on a solid and hazardous waste side respect it and appreciate it. It's good for business. But now, when in 2019, when the whole dirty dirt thing came along, and that goes way back to Sandy and the State Commission of Investigation, now you have a law that basically says we need to extend it to soil removal, disposal, transportation. And you might imagine that really just created chaos. Landscapers, pool companies. I mean, everybody touches it, right? All the practitioners on this call. The sticking point, and I remember, Mike, and you probably remember too, when the legislation was going through, the sticking point, I'll never forget it, and we testified on it, because they said it applies to brokers, consultants, and salespeople. Boy, oh boy, did that ever come back to haunt everybody. Because what is a broker? And I'll share with everybody, and I could kind of send this out to our group, but one of our members that's a property management company, basically banks hire them to manage abandoned properties. And every so often they have to call for waste disposal. Happens on a quarterly basis. Back in 2019, when the law came out, the department issued a fine saying, you're now a broker, you didn't register, you have to get your A901. Company sued. It went all the way up to the administrative law judge. She just, and this actually just was resolved in December. The administrative law judge took a hard look at it and said, wow, I'm having a tough time seeing them as a broker, right? Because it's really not their business. They do it as part of taking care of the property. So she was kind of, and again, this is all unwritten, it's all public. She was kind of hinting to that. They're not a broker. But then, if you know how the process works, she rendered a decision in favor of the plaintiff. it goes to the commissioner, DEP Commissioner Sean Latourette. He actually even, you know, if you read the opinion, he actually basically concurs that, you know, actually he thinks they are still a broker. It was dismissed on the grounds that the fine was issued before the rules came out, before the legislation came out. So, you know, no fine was issued. So the reason why I say that, Phil, is we're waiting with bated breath for the rules to come out. I think they're going to come out. I don't think they're going to come out in January, probably sometime late winter, early spring. We'll have our comment process. We'll see what they say about some of the other issues that we care about. And then hopefully we could fix this through the regulatory process. And we don't see, you know, we don't need to have a legislative fix here. But this is one issue, that whole broker issue. I know a lot of our folks care about it, because I know LSRPs are exempt, but our landscapers exempt, and I know that there's an exit ramp that the DEP wants to kind of create for them, right? Like clean dirt, but we'll see what happens. But that's going to be a big one when it comes out, at least for a lot of our members.
Right, and even you know, if they've been regulated by Q&A, and if you read the Q&A, I mean, LSRPs are exempt if they're retained to provide services on remediation. You know, so there's LSRPs who do due diligence, there's LSRPs who do other type of work for clients. So, you know, and the other thing too is an LSRP is an individual, it's not a company. So if the company's large, so there's a lot of different avenues to that whole, even that one line exemption that's provided, that's going to need a lot of great clarity. And, you know, again, I was hearing winter, and then everybody went silent as to when it was coming out. You know, as far as that goes. So
I think right now, I mean, I checked with Janine McGregor. She's saying it's still internal. I don't know if that means the commissioner or at the governor's office, but it's coming out. I mean, I think sooner rather than later. And here's what I want to stress to everybody, because I get about an email a month now, you know, wondering. Right now, all the companies that work around soil should be registered, right? That registration process, that window has closed. You should at least be registered. You know, whether or not you apply for the A901, it's pretty clear what the law said. This was going back to July of 2022, when the governor kind of extended the deadline, saying, let's wait till the rules come out. And then you have 30 days after the rule come out that you have to apply for the A901. Our hope is that we'll see the details of the rule. We can work it out through the regulatory process. We have to go legislatively. I know I put the Senator Smith on alert. He keeps asking me whenever I see him, right? How's it going on Dirty Dirt? And I said, we're waiting for the rule, right? And so just keep me posted. So I think it's going to be interesting. But again, we're going to want to try to assuage any concerns with, you know, overreach here and have all these A901s out there when you really don't need to.
And you and I, hopefully,
so we'll see what happens.
You and I hopefully will have the same conversation next year, because in a perfect world, you know, if they drop it sometime in this quarter, it's a year. So next year, you know, we would have seen the proposal, responded to comments, and now we'd be talking about waiting to hear what the comments would be. So it's a long way off.
Yeah, I think we have a year. Yeah, it's a long way off.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing, I think.
How about SARA 2.0 rules? You hear anything?
Yeah, I haven't heard anything, Phil. I don't know if anybody on the call has, but maybe that's a question that we could ask the commissioner on the 24th.
You want to plug you want to plug
status of that rule.
You want to plug the 24th?
Yeah, so for folks, you know, we're going to do a virtual conversation with Sean Latourette, the commissioner, on January 24th at 9:30. You know, I'm teeing up some topics to his staff, but a lot of these questions, like the status of Dirty Dirt, we could ask about SARA 2.0. We could figure that out too. So the one thing I wanted to mention, Phil, right, and this is kind of interesting about what happened last night with all the flooding, the stormwater. We did an event in August. The stormwater rules came out last June. They went final. We did something in August. One of our members is actually an expert in this. And I think, you know, for projects that were caught in the pipeline, maybe they felt the pain, but you know, what came out of that event was that a lot of engineers and a lot of responsible parties or applicants, you know, are going to just address the new stormwater rules. I think everybody realizes we got to fix the flooding problems out there, right? So, I mean, it's kind of interesting that, you know, there was a lot of concern out there, and I'm not saying that those concerns aren't valid and they may exist today, but the takeaway from the engineering side was, you know, now that we know what we need to do, we'll engineer it, you know, we'll design it. And it's maybe a bigger basin, you know, that kind of thing. So, you know, I know that concerned a lot of our folks. You know, environmental justice, I could tell you it's been final now. We talked about it last August. There was a couple of applicants that are concerned with, you know, just the time frame to get permits renewed. You know, our biggest concern was, and this is where you got to guard against, right? Everybody understands the local community, local impact. But when you have statewide groups coming in to try to slow the process, that's when it kind of gets a little interesting. And, you know, we kind of want to avoid that situation, right? Because again, going back to what I said earlier, it's about predictability, right? And so if I have to get my Title V air permit renewed or modified, you know, when can I get it? You know, and then deal with it. So, you know, environmental justice, I would put a question mark in there. I mean, when final, people are abiding by it, but we'll see what happens with the implementation.
How about with DEP? I mean, we're going to be you know, next year's the gubernatorial election, which we'll talk about in a minute. We do know that Sean Moriarty, the deputy commissioner, is leaving imminently this month, is my understanding. If not, if I haven't called yet to see if he doesn't answer his phone. You know, there are, I mean, any other shakeups you know about, any changes that might be happening DEP level?
No, I think you hit on a big one is Sean Moriarty.
Yeah, or who's replacing him?
So I don't know. You know, I don't know. Maybe that's a question we could ask the commissioner if he's going to be at liberty to say. Because look, I want to give Sean Moriarty some acknowledgement here because he was always helpful, always responsive. He came out to a lot of our events, always. I mean, I can't begin to tell you how many times over the last 2 or 3 years, you know, I kept asking him for help and he was there. So he's going to be missed. And I hope whoever Sean Latourette replaces him with still continues that outreach to the regulated community. So I don't know, Phil, but here's what I think, Mike, you could jump in here. I've been around long enough to know when the governor starts winding down his second term, right, 2 years left, that's when, and you've seen it already, right? I know George Helmy left, who was the chief of staff. Now it's Diane Cassetti, who's the DOT commissioner. There's already been some moves, right? Judy Persicelli left Department of Health. So, you know, don't be surprised if you start seeing more of that, you know, this year, definitely the following year, because then you're starting to wrap up. It's the governor's race. So I think, you know, the message for everybody is be prepared for some transitions. And we'll keep everybody posted on what we hear in terms of replacements, but I haven't heard anything else.
Yeah, no, Sean was definitely somebody who was always available. He seemed to be the public side of the department. He was out, and whenever you made a request, whether it was SARA 2.0 or NRD or, you know, A901, he was the person they sent out, you know, with Paul Stofa. So it'll be interesting to see how things play out there.
My question was, I got invited, but it got postponed to his leaving DEP party. He was supposed to be at a bowling alley. Is he a bowler?
So he's a big.
I don't know, like I think that would have been a good way to say goodbye, I guess, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's good.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's good to have those bowling balls around all you guys, but I mean, he's a Toms River guy. You know, Toms River East, you know, Toms River North High School graduate, I believe, and you know, and definitely a sportsman. I mean, you saw him gimp around a while with that cast after he, you know, tore his ankle up playing basketball, and he still thinks he's in his 20s, but doesn't always work that way. We all do, but how about, you know, I said the word, the 3 letters, everything's either 3 or 4 letters in everything that we do. NRD, we saw some action. We saw some proposed settlements and some controversial settlements in, you know, 2023 we just left. You know, where do you think we're going with that? And I mean, I always thought it was interesting. You have an entire commissioner's office full of attorneys. You figured something was going to happen.
Tony, didn't your former boss, Hal Bozarth, used to say NRD was an acronym for no real development?
Actually, I forgot about that, Mike. That's actually pretty good.
Hal always came up with the one-liners.
We all remember the Brad Campbell days too, where it really spiked up with NRD. then it kind of, I don't want to say took a backseat, but it wasn't as prevalent. But, look, this is again from where I sit, Phil. I haven't heard and seen a lot of concern around NRD. I think it's something, again, that has to be addressed and is being addressed, good or bad, depending on what your project is. But, again, I think we had an event with Matt Plack and the Attorney General last February, and we talked about NRD, and I know that they're working with, his department is working with the DEP on settling these cases. Knock on wood, I mean, I don't know, there's not much to report from my end on it.
Yeah, I mean, I touched upon before, there was a, public hearing last night in Toms River. The town of Toms River, as well as Save the Barnegat Bay, are suing the state and BASF. We'll see where all that plays out. But just because the locals aren't happy with what the settlement brings, and as much as I try to explain that it's not up to the locals to be happy, people are going to do what they want to do. But it's there was a couple things, and we'll see what ends up happening. Because the one interesting part is, if you remember, Sarah, the original Sarah, back in 2009, extended and changed the statutory limitation on NRD. And I know some of my cases, those limitations are coming and expiring. So it'll be interesting to see how things play out, and how that, if that takes any root at all in this coming year. So.
Right, I agree.
Any questions out there? Anybody? I see a couple people unmute, mute, and go back and forth. Any topic that we haven't hit? Because I got a couple more to bring up to Tony. Okay, I see nothing going. You talked about, you hit about flood hazard. We saw those rules come out. I believe it was last year. So I think it was 2023. Yeah, seems like it was a long time ago. But and I know there's been some, Vince Mazzi has kind of been the face of that, and we've seen him out on some talking circuits. Have you heard from anybody, let it be developers or consultants, that new constraints and reducing development as to we thought it was going to be a big blow to development, especially in certain areas? Are you hearing that, seeing that, or any of your members coming?
No, Phil, I mean, yeah, I mean, and I'll put another plug in. We're going to do an in-person real estate forecast next Wednesday at the Hasbrook Heights Hilton. We're going to have a whole bunch of real estate professionals. And in the speaker call, I was talking to a couple of developers, and, they basically said their biggest issue is, again, predictability, length of time to get everything approved. I think, Phil, to your point, with the stormwater flood hazard, people are going to work around it. They're going to design for it. They're going to incorporate it. I'm not aware, and maybe the Builders Association probably has more detail on it, but it's one of those things where, again, if you look at the flooding, again, we had to cancel a meeting today because of flooding. I mean, that's never happened in my career. I mean, we shouldn't have floods. I mean, we should, try to get to a point where, especially with all the federal dollars that have come in, over the last 3 years, I mean, we got to remedy it. And I think, no, knock on wood, I think, and you'll probably hear this next Wednesday if you come to our event. People are just working around it and incorporating the regulatory conditions.
So I have 10 minutes left on this. Again, anything, environmental justice. I think you touched a little bit upon it. I mean, you see impacting development, or, I mean, again, everything slows down the process. So we can assume that,
I mentioned one thing, Phil, that I'm going to be working with you on, the green remediation, or sustainable. Because I think it's important. I mean, so you talk about proactive things that I think we can do. But, probably in April, CPES and CIANJ will put together an in-person focused on green sustainable remediation. Boy, I remember going back years ago, we talked about, does it make sense to truck all that soil out or leave it in place and let it attenuate? Talking about the big picture carbon footprint. And I remember, now this is going back 15 years. I remember sitting in a meeting with Senator Smith and one of our oil company reps, and he brought it up. He's like, have you looked at the sustainable side of this? That, you're digging and hauling and you're putting it in a landfill. I mean, is it better to just come up with new technologies? And, the senator kind of appreciated it and said, yeah, that makes sense, right? You got to look at the big picture. So I think it's time that we, with all this talk about climate change and sustainability, we have to apply it to remediation. And I think I'm looking forward to putting that program together with you, Phil, and hopefully we'll have a good discussion around why it's important, and maybe we'll have a bill out of it or some policy changes.
And for, if you didn't see, I think it was August, September, DEP site remediation, or whatever the new acronym is there, dropped a, I think they called it Green and Sustainable Environment Remediation Guidance document. I think it's like 5 pages, and just talks about, as consultants, LSRPs, what we're supposed to think about when it comes to remediation. Don't let your truck idle. Try to, not go to one site in a day, go to 2. It was an interesting short little document that just came out. And you wonder what that was, the precursor to something else. So I think we're still going to see more of that down the road. And as far as that goes.
I also think, Phil, and this is important, I think, we're probably going to do something again on PFAS, and I'll label it under emerging contaminants. And this has been something that's been in my career, Mike's career. We see it all the time in Trenton, where fear and perception drives legislation. It should be science, should be facts, should be technology, should be all of that. We got to get ahead of it, because, again, going back to the speed of business, boy, Mike, I'm sure you could attest to this. When a bill gets dropped and they have so many other priorities, boy, they have to, okay, tell me what your position is, like, and it's got to be crystal clear, because they'll incorporate it. But I think staying ahead of that, like these emerging contaminants, important that the fear and perception doesn't drive legislation, because that's where the damage is done.
Were you aware the DEP dropped the environmental stewardship program during the CNE inspections? I was not. You know anything about
The
that?
stewardship program, I wasn't aware of it either.
Yeah, I was not.
No.
Yeah, that's news to me. Yeah.
Well,
So
you're bringing back memory
that?
of Gold Star, Silver Star. I remember the Gold Star is going back to a long time ago.
I remember the
That was
cleanup
the
star.
Bob
Right, Mike?
Shin, that was Bob Shin days. Yeah.
Yeah,
Rest
sure.
in peace. Rest in peace.
No, I'm not
Bob.
aware of it. I mean, I could look into that, but I didn't know that they were dropping that.
I didn't either. I did not either. So we got 6 minutes left. So my made a note here. So 6 minutes. We're 2024. 2025 is going to be a gubernatorial election year. There's going to be somebody or somebodies who start dropping their name as running for governor in 2025. Who are we expecting on both sides? Now, we already know Tammy Murphy's out of the picture because she's running for Senate.
Yeah, so Phil, this is where I hope my internet connection goes, right? Because this is always something that's always fascinating, and it gets interesting on, and I'll tell you, I mean, Jack Ciattarelli is out there publicly saying that he wants to run again in 2025. So is he going to be, out there alone? Probably not. I'm sure you'll get some other Republicans that'll kind of test the waters. On a Democrat side, I think you got to watch what happens with the Senate race, right? Tammy's out there, Congressman Kim. I think there's a couple other people that have committed to running in a Democratic primary, but then don't count Senator Menendez out, right? Because he hasn't resigned, and I'm sure he's technically going to run again. So I think so goes the Senate seat. Then in 2025, on the Democrat side, the names that are out there, obviously, Fulop is announced, Mayor Fulop from Jersey City. You had former Senate President Steve Sweeney formally announce, people's names like Mikey, Congresswoman Cheryl, Josh Gottheimer, and other kind. These are all speculation at this point, but I think it'll be interesting. But I think you have to wait and see what happens with our Senate race, and also what happens with the president's race. I think a lot's going to dictate what happens in 2025. And look, here's a bit of trivia. The last time New Jersey elected a U.S. senator on the Republican side, you have to go back to 1972, Clifford Case. So it's been a long time, So again, anything can happen in politics, and that's why I say expect the unexpected.
But Phil, just to give a selfish plug, if you want to meet these candidates next year, February 6, 2025, the Walk to Washington train trip will be back. And hopefully those folks will be on there, because we always say, if you're going to run, you got to do the walk.
Mike, I'm glad you're bringing it back, Mike.
I know, me too. It'll be 5 years. 5 years from the
way too long
for the pandemic. Yeah.
And is that an electric train or a diesel train?
That's why I told Bob Smith, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Actually, I got a call from a very prominent congressional member who asked me, how did your train get back to New Jersey? All the trains were stopped in Union Station, nothing moved. I said, yeah, they were all electric trains. I said, we had a diesel. So it's in the concept of don't put all your eggs in one basket, be prepared.
And today, and by the way, just for all of you, today is 25 years ago that The Sopranos premiered on HBO. So, you know, everyone across the country thought of New Jersey changed 25 years ago.
Well, as a proud Italian American, I don't think, you know, The Sopranos really did us justice, but you know.
Although we got a couple of laughs.
I can say that because my mom and dad are from Italy. So
I guess any questions from the crowd? I mean, this is a quiet, usually there's a lot of questions bouncing back and forth. You know, we've covered pretty much everything on my list, except for you only gave one Republican for governor. There's got to be somebody else out there. I know Mr. O'Scanlan keeps throwing his.
Look, I'm going to throw. Yeah, Declan. You have John Bramnick.
Yeah.
You have Ventesta from Cape May. Yeah, I mean,
it's going to be a crowded field.
What you didn't ask me, Phil, is the U.S. Senate side, who are the Republicans? No, Mike. But the real answer is, because time is running out, who's going to go up against either Tammy Murphy or Andy Kim,
right,
or the Democrat, right? So the U.S. Senate Republican candidate, the names that are out there is, if this name means anything to everybody, Curtis Bashaw, who owns a lot of the hotels in Cape May. There's the mayor of Mendham, you know, Glassner. You know, she's already announced. You have people like Alex Sedan from News 12, who's no longer there. You have potentially even Melinda Chittarelli's name being floated out there. You know, I think it's going to be interesting. That's the more interesting question is, you know, who's going to be the front runner, or who the party's going to coalesce around on the Republican side for U.S. Senate.
Yep, agreed. I think early on, before the First Lady and Congressman Kim got in, I know Andrew Aristoff, the former treasurer under Chris Christie, was interested in running. But who knows, you know, if that has changed.
You could have Dr. George Berkowitz run, you know.
Who's Dr. George Berkowitz? Hey, George.
Hey, Michael. I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me, Phil?
Yes, we can. George, you missed the big announcement. Tony says he's running for governor next year.
Yeah, well, I'm going to run against him. I do want to just take a moment to thank Tony for what he's done relative to the site remediation program. Michael and Tony and I go back a long ways. Michael more than Tony. Tony's a lot younger than Michael and myself. But at any rate, I want to impress upon everybody how important the stakeholder process is when it's available. And if it's not available, maybe we should raise the issue. You really need a robust stakeholder process. I think that the point that we're making relative to the permit improvement is really going to be a function of how important the stakeholder process has been. And it's a question of Tony leading the charge. And thank you, Tony. Thank you for really coalescing a very potent group. Really good to work with you guys. One thing that we haven't talked about is the new EPA PCB rule, which goes into effect February 26th, which will impact remediation of PCBs in the state of New Jersey. Stay tuned. We have a program coming up to go through the new rule. Thanks, Tony. Thank you, Phil. Good job.
Any closing, Tony? Anything else? I think Tony.
Thank you, George.
You look frozen, Tony. But
thank you, George.
Good. So again, thank you to everybody who joined us. Tony, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for being on our board and all of your insight. Mike, thanks for tuning in and you know, definitely giving your insight. You are a few years ahead of you know, Tony and I, but we're catching up. So
yeah, you know, you guys are the quintessential environmental gurus, and congratulations. I know, I think it was ROI, right, Phil, that you made the list. So
they came up with a new list, so they had to find some people to throw on the list. But you guys are on the list every year, so I got.
Yeah, I know, but
even
still, look, the list is getting shorter and shorter. George knows that, and George is on there as well from our years of serving on the Clean Air Council at DEP. You guys, you know, when they talk about environmental issues, they go to you guys. I mean, without a doubt, I'm not just saying that. So I always enjoy coming on these sessions with you all. You're smart. You're well respected both sides of the aisle. You worked all under several governors. Kudos and Happy New Year to you all.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you,
Very
everybody.
kind of you
Yeah,
to say
thank
that.
you.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Thank you,
Everyone,
Phil.
Happy New Year.
Yep.
Yep.
Stay
Thank
safe,
you,
stay
everybody.
well, everybody.
Yep.
Thank you. Bye.